Welcome to another edition of Wisco Dice, and on this edition we're going to go ahead and continue that kind of where we started with the what tools and materials are really useful for terrain, and get into a very basic, very useful terrain project that a lot of us like to do or have, and that's to have, it's really easy to get some pre-manufactured trees or forest, whatever type of tree you want. That's all the flock and everything's glued on. They're pre-painted, or at least the plastic has dyed or whatever. A number of companies out there make them. Heck, you can get, run around like especially around Christmas time. You can find usually really good trees that are maybe some pine trees that are really cheap. Sometimes dusted with a little snow, sometimes not. But what are you going to use to define that area that the forest truly takes up on your game table? So we're going to go ahead and take the next kind of step, and this is a good stepping stone from now that you've gathered some materials to your first project, because this is very similar to what you've probably been doing for basing on your miniatures, and it's going to give you a nice foundation for some of the skills and techniques that you'll use for dressing up your terrain later. I'm a huge fan of dressing up your terrain instead of just taking a board or something and just throwing some flock on it. Sure, you can do that. It'll look good on your table. It'll certainly look better than nothing, or a kid taking a piece of felt and cutting it out and putting it on your table. You can do those kind of things. That's fine. But I prefer, and I think you'll agree when you see the finished results, that a project where you added some extra little decking and details will really help your project look more unique and more interesting for not only you, but for everyone that's going to share and enjoy the gaming experience with your terrain. So one of the things we didn't really talk about in the materials video was hardboard. Maybe I mentioned it, it's not necessarily critical, but typically you want something that's going to base your terrain, that your terrain will be sitting on in most cases. Sometimes when I work with like hills and stuff like that, the hill itself, the blue foam or the insulation foam that I use to manufacture that piece is the base itself. In this case, this is going to be the outer perimeter of the forest, so I've taken 1/4 inch it's called hardboard, and it's basically just sawdust glued together and pressed really hard, and one side gets a very nice smooth finish and the other side is very rough. I like to keep the rough side to the table side, the smooth side up. That's going to be your working space for what you're going to be working on and putting your terrain on. And this is a great material. It's very, very hard. It's very stiff. It's very durable. It tends not to warp when you get it wet with paint, and it'll last you for a very, very long time for this piece of terrain. So those are all very big bonuses. One of the things that I love having with my terrain collection is pieces that I can let other people use, both at the tournaments I host, whether it's Merry Mayhem or some of the other tournaments that I've done over the years, or that I can whip out for a regular game, and it's going to be durable, and it's going to be the same or near the same shape and durability now as it is 10 years from now. And when it finally wears down enough where I'm tired of it and I want to replace it, well, guess what? It's still well good enough for me to donate to the local game store, and with all the game stores we have in the Madison area, they're all happy to take free terrain. You could use corrugated cardboard for this. You could use plastic card for this. It really comes down to what your budget is and maybe what tools you do. This does require some monochrome of saws to be available to cut it with, whether it's like a jigsaw or a bandsaw. And I like to have, you could do with your sanding block and hand sand this, but I have an electric hand sander in my wood shop that I use to kind of bevel down the outer edges. And you want to do that so that it looks a little more flush with your gaming table rather than not. Now, if you're doing this maybe out of corrugated cardboard, you could bevel the edges, but you got to be aware that then you get those little grooves in the corrugated cardboard standing out, which is something usually when I was back in the day when I first started with terrain, that's what I used, and I would just cut it straight rather than beveling the edges. And if I was using plastic card, it's so flat to the table that shouldn't be a problem. The one thing with like a plastic card or a thin cardboard is that you need to make sure it's going to be thick enough to support whatever project you're putting it on, because it's going to warp, it's going to get beaten up pretty quickly. Now, other materials that I'm going to use in this project, I've got some scraps of the blue insulation foam I've used for other projects, flock, and a couple of different glues, both a tacky glue and Elmer's glue wall. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing, I've got my piece of sand. I'm going to use some sand as well, I think, on this project, just to kind of give it a little extra, and that's not currently sitting in the picture. Of course, for tools, I've got an X-Acto knife, which I really probably won't use much. I've got my 2-inch foam knife that I talked about. If you don't have one, the X-Acto knife would be perfect sub. A paintbrush, it's an old used beat up tank brush from Citadel that I had laying around. And that's pretty much it. That's all the tools I'm really going to need. So one of the things I thought would be nice with this particular piece of terrain for the forest that I was going to be doing is it's going to be a little bit more mountainous on the table that it's on, a little more rural, maybe thinking Badlands or something like that. And so I wanted to have some rock features on the piece to kind of, not only do the rock features give it a little more character and uniqueness, but it'll help break up the flatness of the piece. And one of the things I got from a friend of mine was that flat terrain, flat basing, not necessarily looks, when you look at it directly with your eye, it looks the most appealing. So same kind of thing goes with terrain. If you can have something to kind of break up the flat, it'll help make it more eye appealing and eye catching. So just basically, these are scraps from other projects I've been working on. I actually was doing some sandstone like rock ridges with this, so with my hot wire knife. So I'm just going to go ahead and take my foam knife, and I'll use this cut. This is basically a cutting board too, since it's hardboard, and I'm not going to cut through it and protect my table. That knife is really dull, so I guess I'm going to actually use my X-Acto knife. So here I'm going to just go ahead, and this blade's much better. It's usually very useful to use a very sharp knife when you're cutting with foam. I'm just going to kind of bevel down the edges and make them look natural. And this is really all there is to it. You can see there's little scraps. I'll throw those little scraps out in a moment. Good to kind of keep up on your foam dropping, because these things will get all over the place if you're not careful. And as you can see, I'm starting to come together as a nice looking little rock. Quick, simple, just kind of smooth out some of the cuts so that they don't look quite as man-made or manufactured. There, I've got a little rock that I can now use on this table. Clean up that little bit of, sometimes you get a little fuzz on it when you're cutting with a knife. I like to clean some of that up. Some of it I like to leave as well. It gives it kind of a natural look. I've got my waste bin handy, so I can just go ahead and take that then and dump it in my bin. And I'll do the same thing for this larger piece. This one I'm going to try to make this bigger knife that still work, as it is so thick. And there we go. Clean that up. And I could, in theory, actually take some of them chunks I'm cutting off of this and turn them into additional rocks. So it's good to kind of hang on to that. And that's where I like having an old shoe box for these chunks. Is kind of nice to have, so you can just kind of throw them in a box and keep them. In this case, I'm going to toss them in the bin. Here we go. And that's a piece kind of snapped off that I didn't want to. I'm going to trim this down out here so it's a little more beveled. I want to kind of keep that because it gives me a nice little raise without having to do too much additional work. also want to kind of pay attention to people trying to move their models across this. I think this is a little bit too tall for this particular piece because people want to get the trees out, then they're going to put their tray on it, and it's going to be really tippy. That's where I kind of like to keep it this because it's not so bad. So I'm going to knock this down a little bit too to try to keep that in mind. So, and you want to make sure that with your sharp knife that you're very careful. This is just like working in the kitchen. You can cut yourself pretty easily, so be very careful. And I'll actually save that. That's actually a really nice looking little rock that I'll use for this piece. Okay, now I'm just going to go ahead and clean up that cut so that the edges look a little more beveled, which gives it that look of natural wind and water damage and weathering. Again, being very, very as you can see, like in the backdrop there's stuff everywhere. This is just kind of keep things handy, but the work area itself, I want to try and keep it clean. So that's why I'm always trying to keep the chunks that I'm cutting off, throwing them in the trash, just to keep my area clean so that I can have a clear view of what I'm working on and what I'm cutting. Again, not only for safety purposes, but also for just you want to be able to see what you're working on. So there we go. I've just cut that big chunk of scrap. Now I've got 3 nice rocks. I was going to use this little scrap as kind of a raised edge, but I'm going to go ahead and toss it anyways. Okay, so next up will be to go ahead and glue this on. I'm going to use a little bit of this Eileen's tacky glue. You could use Elmer's or PVA glue as well. I want it to kind of stick and hold up a little bit faster so that I can get to the next step for the video. Otherwise, I would normally use PVA on this. And the reason being is I feel that me personally, and I don't know if it's actually true, but I feel that PVA has a little bit better, stronger bond than a tacky glue. And again, that gets into the terrain lasting for a long time. So just spread the glue, something like so. I like to do little circular patterns, and then I'll put that, maybe say there. It looks like it's going to be a happy rock right there. Here we'll do another rock, we'll put that one right there. And finally this last little happy rock, we're going to go ahead and kind of put there. Almost looks like a little smiley face. It'll be a happy little forest. So I'm going to go ahead, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and we'll take a break here as I set up the next kind of step. I didn't get the materials as I was thinking this project through. I kind of dawned on me I wanted to do some additional stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and pause. We'll take a quick break, and when I come back, I'll set up and demonstrate the next part of the manufacture of this piece. Okay, so we're back from that little break. Sorry about that. So what I've gotten here is I've gotten my sand. Now this is a sandbox sand that I purchased down at the local DIY store or Home Depot, Lowe's here in the U.S. Any hardware store probably that has, you can probably find. They have all construction materials that will probably have that. I also grabbed a plastic bin, and this will, as I glue the sand on and I dust this thing over, I'm actually going to set my piece kind of in here once I'm to the point where I'm dusting the sand out, so that this can kind of collect the sand, and then I don't waste the product that I've purchased. Even though this, like a 50-pound bag of this, cost me about $5 US. I don't have money to throw out the window, but just like you guys, we want to try to put our money toward we want to put it towards, which is our gaming experience, whether it's miniatures or on the table, not on something like throwing away perfectly good sand. So I'm going to go ahead, and all I really want to do is these are rocky, so I'm just going to put a bead of glue kind of around each of the rocks. And this is going to be that PVA glue in this case. This I wouldn't want to use tacky glue at all for. And I'm just gonna, just like that, just a bead of glue around each of these pieces, like so. And then maybe I want a little extra sand, a little extra texture right there, and I'm gonna put a little extra texture, so I just kind of shake it like that, and this one's going to be a little extra texture coming off of that. There. Now, got my water cup here, and it's some dirty, nasty water. It doesn't really matter if it's clean or dirty here, because you're going to end up painting this project. So you'll notice that. But I'm going to just kind of wet down that glue around my rock. Maybe I want to, now that this is kind of wetted down, I'll do this spot here too, because it's a little bit too moist, I think, around here. And I want to get that a little thicker. Put a little, just brush a little over the top of that as well. Just to kind of spread it out and make sure that it's up against my rock as well. And now you'll see it also helps if you put a little bit of the glue on the top of the foam. It'll help give it a little extra texture, which will help it match what you're doing with the basing work. So now I'm going to take my thing, and this is actually a little bit heavy for me. So this is where I talked about having the plastic cups handy. I'll just pour some sand in the plastic cup. And now this is much easier for me to use as a shaker, so I can shake over my piece, and basically shaking it like so. And you can see how where this tub is very handy. It's catching the spare bits. Now, we put the excess from the cup back in the bin. Got a lid here. Again, that gets into that clean workspace, so I want to put the lid back on the bin as soon as I'm done using it. Actually, go ahead and put it here up here out of the way. Now I'll give that I hit that set there for seconds. Just give it a nice light shake. The sand, if you give it too hard of a shake, the sand will just pop right off. And you know what? I just thought of, I got all the sand left over here that I collected. Not a lot, but that's enough to do 3 or 4 or 5 miniature bases. So just put that back in my tub for reuse later. I would want to comment a little bit too on the sandbox sand here. Sandbox sand for terrain, whereas I don't necessarily always like it for miniatures bases, has a lot more texture in it. A lot of different granule sizes, which for terrain, since you're dealing with a larger bulk area, it'll give it a much more unique look and much more textured look when used on terrain. So that was kind of important here for this project for me to use something that gave it a little more texture as well to kind of help make it pop and work. So at this point, we've got to wait for the PVA to glue to dry. I usually give it about an hour, so we'll go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, in about an hour, we'll go ahead and start painting this project and talking about that. Okay, so we're back to this woodland base. And so I'm going to go ahead and put an initial coat of paint on this. I like to work with doing my initial coat for basing anything that's going to be woodland or outside for my terrain in brown. So I've got some brown paint here, cheap craft paint, big giant bottle, costs like $2-3 or something like that. So very cheap. And you just take your paint. I take it, I know the rule, we yell about people painting out of the pot, but in this case I'm going to just do one of these, dip my brush in the water, water it down, and that'll help it get in the sand more effectively. And I'm going to paint even the rocks, even though I'm probably going to repaint them black in a little bit. A little more paint. And we'll just do one of these and get the paint coat on. And by painting it like this, it helps with the water and stuff, it helps that sand really adhere to your terrain as well, so that during game usage you don't have the problem of it starting to try to peel off or pop off as well. going to go ahead and take a little bit of time here to go ahead and get back on our forest stand that we were working on. Now you notice the paint's dried up. You can tell that there's spots where it's definitely running. And one of the things, I probably put a little bit too much water in it. You can starting to see just a hair of board warp in it. I don't think that's going to be too bad. The board's still got a lot of flex. I can still do. There's a lot of things I could do to try to pull that back if I needed to, if it was too bad. But it sits pretty flat on the board, so it shouldn't be too noticeable for our players. So what I want to do is I'm going to take these rocky zones that I did on the base, and I want to just get them a nice base coat of black. So I've got my craft paint, my black craft paint. This is cheap. I got it at a craft store, and this is actually it's like half empty, so it's kind of hard to get to. So I'm just going to pour a little bit on my cheapy palette here. My cheapy palette is a nice piece of plastic from some miniature that I bought. I think probably something from Privateer Press or something like that. And we're just going to paint those areas in. Eventually we will dry brush them gray and work those gray tones up. Having the brown, I don't want it to be like a complete absolute black here either, because I want some of those brown tones to kind of show through. I think that helps the naturalness of the rock. So it's more of almost a dry brush here, but a real heavy color, because I want this black to really kind of set the tone of the terrain piece here. And I'm using a fairly large brush again. It's nothing wrong with that. And if I get a little bit of black or gray here when I'm doing it on the areas brown, it's not really going to hurt anything. So the accuracy, this is nice kind of projects for people that aren't maybe necessarily the best painters, also because the things like getting details and accuracy aren't as critical when you're working a terrain piece like this. So this can kind of help you if you're just getting started with painting. It can help you get some feel for some of these techniques on a larger scale with larger brushes to help you get your confidence with your painting as well. So that's always kind of nice. So like there, I just splooched a little bit there. It's not going to hurt anything really in this grand scheme of things. So just go ahead and get the dry brushes done. And one of the nice things at this point is that unlike the previous step where we were painting the entire piece with that first base coat, is that now this is going to be dry much faster, because this is not nearly as heavy a coat of paint that we're putting on, and to an extent I can even do a little blending, wet blending with the coats that I put down earlier. And wet blending is really, at least in my mind, is when you've got, your painted surface that you're working on is still a little damp from the previous coat, and you start to put on the next coat, the paints start to mix on the surface that you're painting and give you a nice seamless, a bit of a seamless transition between the two colors. So that's my mind. I might be describing it wrong, but that's kind of what I think of when I think of a wet blend. So you can see I'm almost done with the black here. Just finish this up. I want this rock maybe a little bit more black, so I put a little heavier coat on it than some of the others. That'll help with the tone of the rocks, gives it a little more natural, since all rocks shouldn't necessarily look the same color. And there we go. It's all blacked up. Now I've got a gray craft paint here. Here we go. There's actually not very much of this left. I might have to find, I think I have another one laying around here. In fact, this one looks pretty empty. Oop, there's a little bit there. That's probably going to be more than enough, so I'm just going to put that on my palette. And you notice here on my palette, I actually, since I got this is my original black, I put it right here on the black. This also, I can kind of use it to blend the color up a little bit too, so the transitions aren't quite as. So I can do a little mixing right there on my palette. And I'm gonna take my brush, and where I put it on the paper to kind of dry brush it out, I'm blending it there as well. And then just more dry brushing, getting the gray tones started. And this I need even less color on the surface, so I can do an even faster dry brush. And there we kind of go. Now I'm going to let this coat dry a little bit before I move on. I'll move on to a lighter gray, and when we come back you'll see the finished results of all that gray. Okay, and we are back again, and this time I'm going to go ahead and just continue working on the grays on this forest piece, just bringing those out. Again, I mean, this could have been just as simple. I mean, you could just take this project and just toss on some flock on it and call it done. Maybe a little static grass here or there in spots, and it would be just fine. It would have looked nice. It would have been fine. The idea here, the reason I'm doing these extra steps and making this project more complex is, one, it's kind of good for you as the audience to see that, but also for in-game is to make the project more interesting than what we originally started out with. So again, I'm going to kind of work with that. This is a medium gray is what it's described as. I would say that's pretty accurate. And of course, we're still fighting that pretty much empty bottle here. So again, I'm just gonna start with a dry brush here. We're gonna use we're just gonna do that wet dry brushing technique of just getting color on, and then we'll just go right back over with a lighter gray in just a moment. So, and now you can start, since it's dried up, this dry brush is really working effectively to bring up that color, but that black was kind of muted down because I did that technique before. In fact, you can start to see, if you really look close, you can see some of the gray even still starting to show on the rocks from that work I did earlier. And now that really just, look at those lines in that from the when I cut it with a foam knife, which I didn't show because these were just scraps. But you can look at how that defined, how that looks like a really cool rock right there. It's just a very happy rock. And just need a little more gray here. And you also notice I kind of, when I go back to the pot and I get my new dry brush, I try to focus on the rock itself, because that's going to be probably the piece that's the most gray. I hit that with a brush first, and then I do this sand that's on the outside second. And again, I'm not worried about if I get a little splotch here or there. It's not a big deal. And all in all, it kind of adds to the flavor and look of the piece. Now, one of the things with craft paints that's important is to make sure that you shake the bottle pretty well. You should do that with your like, especially if you're getting the dropper bottle paint. So like for your miniatures paint, shake the bottles good. Another thing, and I found this is a trick that I didn't tell, is especially with the dropper bottles, you want to take them and just kind of spin them like this. Same with your spray primers. You want, especially if they got a ball in there, because that gets that stuff in the bottom shook up loose really good. And then do a shake like this. So a spin, and then shake like this. Great little top tip to get your paint and get that medium mixed well within your paint. Now for this, that light gray I feel is a little too light that I actually have. So I want to mix it with a touch of the regular gray. It's that medium gray, just to mute it a hair in color and dry it up. And again, I'm going to start with a rock. I want to try to be kind of light here, especially like this rock's got a bunch of sand that I put on it, if you remember from earlier in the video. So that really kind of, if you look at it nice here, hopefully that shows up well on the camera, that starts to really make that rock come to life and get kind of excited. And you can see some of those browns What's really neat here is you can see some of those browns kind of still show through, so that makes it look very natural. Some of the grays and the blacks really makes that rock come to life, and just nice light dry brush over it here. And look at this rock. Here's those lines that are in this rock. Look at how that just makes that come to life. It's just very, very happy, very, very nice rock on the board now. And again, just finishing this up. Just quick dry brush, and bam, that's done. That's really just it. This is probably, I'm not real happy with this spot. I'm going to make it a little lighter. Maybe I'll actually go back and do a quick full-on, just on the high spots with that very light white rock. Kind of just like if you were painting your miniature and you're looking for the angle of the light to get your piece. Well, I'm kind of thinking the light source is hitting my piece here, so I just went with that lighter gray just a little bit to touch on the rocks on this side to kind of bring them, and that really did. I'm really happy with that, and I'm going to do that a little bit here and here just to kind of make these spots a little happier. And look, like this rock here, I did not hit it right behind this rock, because I'm thinking the light's coming in from here. So I left it so it looks a little darker right behind the rock. The rock's providing a little bit of a shadow there. Not much, but a little bit. And there we go. Okay, so that part's done. I'm going to close up my bottles. And the next part that would be to this project is to go ahead and start with the flocking. Now, I'm going to go ahead, I need to get some stuff to set up, so I'll go ahead and pause, take a quick pause here and get that set up, and then we'll go ahead and get the flocking setup done and get the initial coats of flock on this. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and start with the flocking. I'm going to go ahead and just give you a quick overview on the materials here. For the tool I'm going to use here, I got these disposable plastic storage bins that are fairly large. It's nice as you're sprinkling, you're putting your flock on to kind of capture and collect your material as you work on your project. I don't put the glue on here because I don't want the glue to drip in this bin. Otherwise, it's going to wreck the flock that I collect when I do it. I mean, occasionally you'll get that, but hopefully you can minimize that. So I'm going to paint the glue on over here, get the glue spread out, and then I'll pick up the piece, put it in the bin, and spread the flock on. Now, the first coat of flock I'm going to use, I like using this brown undercoat, and then I like to go to the blended turf green blend from Woodland Scenics. You could manufacture this with several different colors of flock. Just kind of mix them into your own desired color. I just happen to like this because it comes from the manufacturer in what I think is a very desirable blend and color mixture. And I like these Woodland Scenic shaker bottles, so I usually buy the first one in a shaker bottle in whatever mix, so I have a shaker bottle for that particular color and a nice label so I can tell what it is. And then afterwards, these are refillable, so afterwards I can buy the bag blends. The big bags are actually cheaper and more volume than this plastic shaker bottle, so after that I usually get the bags. There are a lot of manufacturers out there. You don't have to buy Woodland Scenics. You can play with whatever you like. I'm also going to use, at this point, once the flock is down and started to set up a hair, I'm going to use this product from Woodland Scenics, lichen. It actually is lichen, and it's dyed or colored a little bit sometimes. This just happens to be a light green. It'll be nice, make some great looking natural bushes. And I'm going to use this bag I've had forever. They bought this huge bag. I'm not even sure if they make it and sell it in bags this big anymore. This clump foliage, it's a dark green or a green foliage that they make it. They call it for ground cover and tree foliage. I like it for nice bushes on the ground. Or clumps of representing clumps of undergrowth. It works really nice, gives a nice visual texture difference, and helps. Again, remember what I talked earlier, that part of making a piece of terrain like this is if it stays flat, it's very deceptive to the eye. It does not look as natural as something where you can get a little bit of. I mean, you look at the ground outside. You go outside right now today, and you look at the ground. The ground rolls like as it goes up to the front of it, wherever you live. It rolls, and there's different deviations. Even if they're very, very slight and minor, there's definitely different deviations in the way the ground is. And so this gives you a great way to break up the flatness of the surface here to make it look like there's more texture and more rolling without making it exceptionally difficult for people to play with it and maneuver their models. Additionally, those bushes will be kind of a complement to these rocks for people's movement trays when they maneuver their units on this particular piece. As you can kind of think, if you thought of this as a movement tray, here I'm kind of struggling. Well, if I put a little bush maybe over here, something like that, that might help keep that movement tray stable while somebody's models are on it. Instead of, can't think of everybody's models are going to be just like this or on top of these 3 rocks every time. So let's go ahead and get started with putting that flock on, and we'll go from there. So the first thing we'll do is I'm going to take the PVA glue, and I'm just going to take it straight from the bottle, and I'm just going to draw lines on my terrain piece. So I'm going to kind of start defining this outside line with a nice bead of glue, and then I'll just kind of loop in here, and this is a nice wide area, so I'll put a nice squiggle, and that's a good little spot there, a little squiggle there. Okay, now I'm going to break up some of these rockier parts, so I'm going to put a little glue here, these little sand spots that I put on, put some glue there. Maybe I'll put a little flock up in here, so I'm going to glue some flock over there, and we'll do a little flock like right here as well. Kind of break up that rock a little bit that I painted on and glued on there. And then over here, I think this little spot here, this little happy rock here, he needs a little what looks like lichen's going to be growing, I think, right there. So I'm going to just nice little bead of glue there, a little lichen. And it doesn't have to be, I'm going to a little bead of glue there. It'll also help kind of define those ridges. And I'm going to give it a little bead here to kind of trim this here. And again, thinking about the way the light hits it, the light's coming from this, I think that it would grow a little better from this side of the rock. So I'm just a little bit, and maybe a little bit of a bead right here. I think that looks like a good spot. And that'll break up the visual curiosity on these as well. It'll make them look a little more natural. Gives you a little bit more of those natural tones and colors into your piece, and make it look unique. This little spot here needs some. That line needs a little glue as well. And it doesn't hurt to be generous with the glue at this point. So I'm gonna make sure I got a good chunk of glue. So I've got glue that looks something like this on the piece now. I'm now going to spread out. Now I'm going to take my brush, just rinse it off a little bit. I want it to be wet, but I don't want it to be soaking. So I'm going to just kind of swipe the brush off a little bit there. And then I'm just going to, this kind of helps spread the glue. And I want to get this glue spread evenly around the piece. And again, this is just like when I was painting the sand. I don't really care if I get a little bit of that glue over the top of my painted on rock space, because that kind of covers up that ridge. It'll give it a nice, it won't be as thick in there, so the flock won't quite stick as well. When you paint over it, just touch like right here. I don't know if all of you can see it, but I've just kind of gotten onto that a little bit. Well, that flock will just be enough there to kind of give it. The rock will start to appear as if it's as if the grass is starting to try to grow over the rock and take control, which is very natural if you see a rock formation or near the edge of some rocky ground. You'll see, and there's grass nearby. You'll see that the grass is trying to take control of that living area and explodes. So there I go. I've got it glued. Now it's all spread around. And you want to do this kind of quickly. So I'm going to do it like this, because the glue will start with that water, and it'll start to kind of pull apart and clump back together. And since this is a nice shaker, I'm just going to pretty heavily coat the entire piece with this flock. And if you look at it, you can see, one, I've captured it. Look at all that flock that I could have lost if I would have shaken it over the floor or just over the empty workspace. It's already been collected, and now I've got a nice set. Now, usually I like to set this up for 5 to 10 minutes after I've kind of done this before I knock it off or shake it, so I can take this bin. I have a number of these bins. It's nice. I can set this off to the side and let it set up. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to go ahead and work with it right away. It really doesn't kill it too much, but I like to kind of just, in this case, I can just kind of tap it a little bit. Sometimes you can pick it up and tap the back of it just to knock the loose stuff off. And look at that. Wow, that really, all of a sudden, has just come to life and been exciting. It's just, pow, wow, you didn't see that coming, did you? Just, pow, right there. Now I can I'll just unscrew this, and I recommend you grab your trash can for what I'm about to do. I've unscrewed this. I'm going to just tap my bin. And you see what I was talking about? There's must have been a little glue. No, that's just static there on that. And I want to just get this back into a nice pile. And I'm going to do this over the trash just in case, because there, whoops, I spilled just a touch. But I recaptured like 2 or 3 tablespoons of the flock versus what I would have just thrown away and lost. And that, when you're talking 2 or 3 tablespoons of flock, you're talking, you know, what, 10, 15 miniatures worth of bases, if you were, depending on how much you're putting on of that particular type. So that's actually a very good chunk of material. So next up, we're done with this. We're going to go ahead and put this to the side, get it out of the way. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and look at some of the areas where I want to put some flock. So I've got like a couple of spots here where the glue is already starting to go through and it's on these rocky bits. I'm going to just take my glue and put light drizzle to kind of add here and here and work with the glue that's already kind of pooling up, since I kind of pulled the trigger a little quickly here. Put it there. And what I'm going to do is take some of this clump foliage and just press it in and turn those into little bushes. So there's a nice little bush that's kind of growing out of that rock there. I'll take a little bit here. Bing. A little bit here. They're just little bushes, they're not that much. And just take a little bit. I don't want this to be much of a bush. I want this to just, look like it's just a hair overgrowth there. So, just some taller plants. And bingo. All of a sudden, again, starting to come together. And you want to be really careful, since I'm handling this wet, and I do recommend that you let it sit up for 10 or 15 minutes. And even if you do that much, it can start to, your material here can be, it will still be that flock will still be very damp on your whatever. So you really don't want to touch it or put a brush or anything where it is. If you do, you're basically going to have to wait for the entire project to dry, re-glue it, and redo that surface to get a proper look. You also can see kind of how that brown underneath it shows through the flock just a little bit to make. And I like that because it gives that kind of a rich turf natural look to the flock that I'm spreading. Especially since that flock has a nice multiple textures. There's like a little bit of yellow flock in there and a lot of green flock, so it really breaks it up and makes it a natural look. Now I'm thinking I want a giant lichen bush right here in the center. I think that's going to be a nice complement. It'll add that extra little bit of green and life to this piece. So I'm going to put a big bit of glue here. Like so. And I'm going to grab my piece of this. And this is way too big for what I want. So I'm going to try to trim that down a little. A lot of times, if you're not careful with these, you trim it down and then the pieces that you end up with aren't going to be reusable. So kind of try to, when you trim it, to not end up with a bunch of stalks coming out on both ends. Otherwise, you have a piece that's basically unusable. At least in my opinion. I want it to look bushy I'm going to put this here right in the center. I'm going to push it down into that glue. Try to look for any stems that want to try to poke themselves out the wrong way. And in fact, here I've got one that's kind of sticky. I can take the end of a brush. There's another one. Try to get them turned inside to the bush so they look like they're coming out of the ground rather than out of the ordinary. Now that's ready to dry and set up. So when we come back, we'll go ahead and show you kind of the finished piece, and we'll just take a snapshot of the finished piece so you can see it, and we'll wrap this thing up. Oh, I should note actually one thing I want to do here. I said I was done with this, but I'm not going to be done with it. Since I did this with this, and there's a lot of glue showing, and I've got some glue here that I think could use another coat of flock, of that green blend flock. So I'm going to just go ahead and set this back in my bin and do another shaker run on some of this to kind of help hide. And that glue won't really stand out or be seen on the model, but it's on the terrain piece. But if it's so apparent at this point, I don't think the finished flock look, what you're going to get, is going to look the way you want it to. So it's not a bad thing to just sprinkle a little extra flock on your entire piece. Since I was quick to the gun here, do another tap, and voila! I really like the way that's turning out. And okay, so I think that's a nice finished piece here. I think we're looking at the finished product. Let's go ahead and I'll take a moment here to grab some trees and show you what a finished forest would look like, you know, for like a before the game kind of look. And again, as you think about this for your gameplay, now you have this bush here that's going to give some traction to your tray as well. It kind of helps. It squishes down, but it also helps by putting a little grip on anybody's plastic trays or wooden trays to help them from sliding around when they're using this in battle. And it really, that center bush gives it a nice color, and it really gives a nice, the different layers and textures of depth. I mean, help break up the piece and make it look incredibly eye-appealing, and makes it look more rolling than it really actually is. So, all right, let's grab some trees and look at the final project. Okay, and now you're looking at the finished piece. I put some trees on it to just kind of help you see, and it helps get that visual break up. See, I've got the bases on the trees actually lump up a little bit too to help break up that flat pattern. You can look at like this first tree here. Obviously the base of that tree needs some work. It needs to be finished up. Probably put some of that green flock on it and dress it on, maybe a little gray dry brush here and there. And then I've got a couple other examples of trees here. This tree here is actually, that you're looking at here, that pine. That's actually from a set of Christmas trees that I got around the holiday seasons at, I don't know, some discount store for fairly cheap. They were nice conifer type trees, nice pine trees. They're intended for like a holiday motif setup or whatever. I think they work perfectly fine, and they're incredibly durable. And then over here is this plastic armature tree, this one here, that you have to glue the flock on from Woodland Scenics. Of the trees, these are really my favorites. This one in particular is not one of my better builds though, so I think this was early in my building of trees. But there we go, there's the finished piece, and you can see with the trees on it, it really does come to life. It really does look like a forest. It looks very natural. It looks very very out there in the wilderness, and this is going to be a great addition to Merry Mayhem 2013. Okay, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you've gotten some great ideas for how you can make forest bases, and this is going to be a great foundations video for what we're going to talk about in the future when we start talking about doing other types of terrain, so that we don't have to loop back to talking about these basic techniques, and we can kind of focus on the new techniques we're talking about in those additional videos. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments, or you can send them to hosts@wiscodice.com. We'll be happy to answer those questions and let us know. And of course, check out our main podcast at our website at wiscodice.com, or you can go ahead and catch us on iTunes, Stitcher Smart Radio, Blackberry Podcasts. We are listed all over the place. Our podcast is, I think, a great show that we focus primarily on Warhammer Fantasy, but as of late especially, we've been doing a lot of terrain. We're hobbyists, I think, first and foremost, and I think that shows in what we do and what we're putting out here for video. So please enjoy, and again, let us know what you think. Leave us a comment, and we'll be happy to get back to you.